You ever drive through a storm so mean it feels personal? I'm talking about the kind of rain that ain't just falling. It's coming down in solid gray sheets, trying to beat my Peterbilt right into the asphalt. It's like the sky decided to dump the whole damn Atlantic Ocean on one forgotten stretch of West Virginia, and it was taking its sweet time about it. I was slicing through the guts of the Appalachian Mountains, somewhere on a 2-lane blacktop that God forgot to put on the map, and the road was more river than road. The wipers were going full tilt, slap, slap, slapping a rhythm of pure desperation against the glass, and they were still losing the fight. For every swipe that cleared a patch of windshield, another gallon of water would slam into it, a relentless, liquid assault. It was past midnight, that deep, dark part of the night where the world feels empty, and you start wondering if you're the last man on earth, just you and the growl of your engine for company. The only light in the whole damn world was my high beams cutting a 50-foot tunnel into the liquid darkness, illuminating a swirling chaos of rain and blacktop. My stomach was rumbling, a tune that sounded a lot like cheeseburger, onion rings, and a Coke. It's always the same. The road gets dark, the rain gets heavy, and all a man can think about is a hot meal and a dry bed. The cab of my rig, old Bessie, was my cocoon, my rolling fortress against the miserable world. The rumble of the Cummins diesel was a deep growl in my bones, a constant reassuring vibration that told me I was still moving, still making money, still the king of my own little chrome-plated kingdom. The heater was blasting out air that smelled like hot dust, faint diesel, and the ghost of 1,000 bacon, egg, and cheeses I'd eaten on the fly. Outside, the wind howled like a pack of wolves trying to rip the mirrors off. But in here, it was just me and the familiar green glow of the dashboard, a little galaxy of gauges and dials that I knew better than my own face. The world outside could go to hell for all I cared. I was safe in the belly of the beast. I was taking a sharp curve, the kind that makes the trailer try to pass you, my hands tight on the big steering wheel. You gotta feel the road in weather like this, feel the pull of 40 tons of cargo behind you wanting to go straight when the road wants to turn. It's a conversation between you and the weight, a delicate dance on a slippery floor. I feathered the brakes, downshifted with a throaty roar that echoed off the unseen rock faces, and that's when my headlights caught something. It wasn't a deer. I'd seen 1,000,000 of those, their eyes glowing like little green demons before they bolt into the darkness. It wasn't a fallen tree, which would have been a bigger problem, a night-ender. It was a shape, a human shape, standing on the sliver of shoulder between the rusty guardrail and a straight drop into black nothing. And it was wearing a dress, a little black dress, in the middle of a biblical flood, on a mountain road where the only nightlife was raccoons and bears having a territorial dispute over a roadkill possum. My brain tried to process the image. It didn't compute. It was like seeing a penguin in the Sahara, or a politician telling the truth. It just didn't belong. I slowed Bessie down, the air brakes hissing like a nest of rattlers, a sound that cut right through the roar of the rain and wind. My first thought was, it's a ghost. One of them local legends you hear about at the truck stops after 3 cups of burnt coffee. The lady of Route 42. The phantom prom queen. Every stretch of lonely highways got one. A sad story to keep drivers awake on the long hauls. My second thought was, ghost or not, she's got great legs. Even from 100 feet away, through a curtain of rain that distorted everything, I could see the silhouette of them, long and perfectly shaped. My mind filled in the blanks, and the picture it painted was mighty fine. As I got closer, the headlights painted the whole insane picture, chasing away the ghost story and replacing it with a much more interesting reality. It was a woman, all right. Flesh and blood and a whole lot of misery, soaked to the bone, like she'd been baptized in the storm. Her hair, dark and long, was plastered to her face and neck in thick black strands, rivulets of water channeling down her skin. The little black dress was glued to her body like a second skin, the fabric shimmering wetly in the harsh glare of my beams, revealing every curve, every dip, every secret she probably thought she was keeping. She had one arm wrapped around herself, shivering so hard I could practically see it from inside my warm cab, and the other one stuck out, thumb up, in the most hopeless, pathetic gesture I'd ever seen. She wasn't looking at me. Her head was down, like she'd given up, and was just waiting for the world to swallow her whole, for the mountain to claim her. Forget the cheeseburger, forget the ghost stories. A woman like that, in a storm like this, you don't drive by, you just don't. Not if you're Sam McCarty. Some guys might. The ones who think every hitchhiker is a serial killer or a cop in disguise. But my mama raised me better. Or maybe she just raised me with a terminal weakness for damsels in distress, especially the ones with legs that could stop traffic and a look of desperation that could start a man's engine. I eased my rig onto the muddy shoulder, the whole 18-wheeler groaning and sighing as it settled into the soft earth, the tires sinking a good few inches. I hit the button and the passenger window whirred down, letting in a blast of cold, wet air that smelled like rain, wet pine needles, and ozone. The sudden chill was a shock to the system after the cozy warmth of the cab. I leaned across the mountain of maps, logbooks, and burger wrappers on my center console, a monument to a life lived on the road. "Honey, you're either running from something awful," I hollered over the roar of the storm, my voice booming in the enclosed space, "or you're headed to the worst damn party in history." She looked up, and my breath caught in my throat like a fish hook, even with mascara running down her cheeks like black tears and her face pale with cold. She was a knockout. A genuine 10 out of 10, makes you forget your own name knockout. She had these huge, dark eyes that looked like they held all the secrets of the night, and right now they were wide with a mixture of fear and disbelief. They blinked slowly, confused, as if she couldn't believe this giant roaring beast had actually stopped for her. Then a flicker of something else. Relief. A tiny spark of hope in a face full of despair. It was like watching a candle being lit in a dark room. "My car broke down," she yelled back, her voice thin and shaky against the wind, barely audible over the engine and the rain. It was a pretty voice, even strained and panicked. "About 5 miles back. The battery just died. Everything just went dark. One minute I was driving, the next just nothing." "Well, the good Lord sent you a bigger battery," I said, patting my dashboard like it was the flank of a faithful horse. Bessie deserved the credit. "Hop in before you catch your death." "Where you headed?" She hesitated, just for a second, her gaze flicking from the massive, snarling grill of my truck, all chrome and fury, to me, a 300-pound gorilla in a flannel shirt and a grease-stained baseball cap. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the mental pros and cons list she was making in a split second. Was the trucker more dangerous than the storm? Was the devil you don't know better than the certain death of hypothermia? It was a fair question. I gave her my best, most harmless grin. It's a grin that's gotten me out of trouble and into a whole lot more. It says, I'm a big guy, but I'm a teddy bear, mostly. Anywhere with a roof, she said, her shoulders slumping in defeat, the last of her resistance washed away by the rain. Literally, anywhere. Can't offer you a roof, but I can offer you a cab, I said, jerking my thumb toward the passenger seat. It's dry, mostly, and it's a hell of a lot warmer than that shoulder. Come on, I don't bite. Hard. She nodded, a quick jerky motion, a final surrender to fate. She started walking toward the passenger door, her steps uncertain on the muddy ground, her bare arms hugged tight to her chest. The way that wet dress clung to her hips as she moved. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of misery and temptation. I watched her in the side mirror, the rain beating on her skin, her body a sleek dark shape against the raging storm. I swear the heater in my cab kicked up another 100 degrees just from the view. This wasn't going to be a boring night, not by a long shot. The passenger door of a Peterbilt is a heavy piece of equipment. It's not made for delicate hands. It's made for guys with calluses like leather pads who slam it shut a dozen times a day. She tugged on the handle once, twice, her slender fingers slipping on the wet chrome. A little sound of frustration escaped her lips, a tiny, frustrated hiss that was immediately swallowed by the wind. I leaned over, my gut pressing against the steering wheel, and shoved the door open from the inside with a grunt. It swung wide with a loud creak of protest, revealing her standing there, looking up at the cab like it was the peak of Mount Everest. The drop from the cab floor to the ground was a good 4 feet, a treacherous climb for anyone, let alone a woman in her state. She was wearing high heels, or what was left of them, thin, spiky things that were completely caked in mud and grass. One of the heels snapped clean off. A city girl, through and through. There was no way she was making that climb in those things. They were weapons, not shoes, and right now they were useless liabilities. Here, I said, unbuckling my seatbelt and half-standing in the cab. I reached down, my big hand looking like a bare paw next to her delicate frame. Give me your hand, and for the love of God, lose the shoes. They've had a rough night. She looked down at her ruined heels with a sad little sigh. A funeral for a pair of $1,000 shoes, I guessed. She kicked them off one by one, leaving them to be swallowed by the mud, a sacrifice to the mountain. Then she placed her hand in mine. Her skin was ice-cold and soft, shockingly soft, like she'd never done a day of hard labor in her life. A jolt went up my arm, a little spark of electricity in the middle of the downpour. It was the contrast, the freezing cold of her skin against the furnace-like warmth of mine. I wrapped my fingers around hers, my thumb stroking the back of her hand out of pure instinct, and pulled. She put a bare foot on the first metal step, which I knew was slick with diesel and rain, and I got an eyeful. As she hoisted herself up, that little black dress, already fighting a losing battle with gravity and modesty, rode up her thighs. And brother, what thighs they were! Pale and smooth and perfect, glistening with rain under the harsh utility light of the open door. For a split second, a glorious, heart-stopping second, I saw the dark edge of her panties, a little triangle of black lace against her stark white skin. It was a flash, a secret glimpse into a world I had no business seeing. My mouth went drier than a desert highway in July. My grip on her hand tightened without me even realizing it. She tumbled into the passenger seat with a soft gasp, landing with a wet squelch on the worn leather. I slammed the heavy door shut, and the world went quiet. The roar of the storm was muffled to a distant drum beat, replaced by the low, steady rumble of the diesel engine and the insistent hiss of the heater. The cab, my kingdom, which usually felt as big as a prairie, suddenly felt as small as a closet. A very, very interesting closet. She sat there, dripping a puddle onto the floor mats and shivering like a leaf in a hurricane. Her arms were wrapped tight around herself, trying to preserve what little body heat she had left. Her teeth were chattering so loud I could hear them over the engine, a frantic, tiny clicking sound. "The thank you," she stammered, her voice trembling, her eyes darting around the cab, taking in the mess of maps, the empty coffee cups, the faint smell of old French fries. "Don't mention it," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and my eyes on her face. It was a losing battle. My gaze kept drifting down, drawn like a moth to a flame. The thin, wet fabric of her dress was plastered to her skin, like a coat of black paint. I could see everything, the gentle curve of her stomach, the outline of her ribs, the undeniable magnificent swell of her breasts, perfectly cupped by the fabric. The delicate lace pattern of her bra was perfectly visible through the material. A secret map I wasn't supposed to be seeing. It was more revealing than if she'd been wearing nothing at all. The imagination, brother, it's a powerful thing, and mine was working overtime. Water was trickling from the ends of her dark hair, running in little rivers down her neck and into the hollow of her collarbone. I watched a single drop trace a path down her throat, over the elegant curve of her clavicle, and disappear into the darkness of her cleavage. I had to physically force my eyes back to the windshield. She smelled like the storm, a clean, earthy smell of rain and wet asphalt, but underneath it all there was a ghost of a perfume, something expensive and floral, like a garden after a summer shower. It was a crazy combination, like a wildflower growing through a crack in the sidewalk. Intoxicating. "I'm Sam," I said, finally getting the rig moving, easing it back onto the slick road with the care of a surgeon. The whole cab vibrated as I shifted gears, the big stick shuddering in my hand right next to her knee. "Willow," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked out the window at the black, rushing darkness, at the trees that looked like skeletal hands reaching for the truck. "My name is Willow." "Willow," I repeated, tasting the name. It suited her. Long, line, and looking like she was about to snap in the wind, but with a strength you couldn't see, a flexibility that let her bend instead of break. Yeah, Willow worked. "You're gonna freeze to death in that thing," I said, nodding at her dress, which was actively trying to give her hypothermia. There's a sleeper in the back. I got some old sweats and a t-shirt in there. They ain't gonna win any fashion awards, but they're dry and clean, I swear." She looked at me, her dark eyes wide and uncertain. For the first time since she got in, I could see the fear in them again, the raw, primal fear of a trapped animal, a lone woman getting into a trucker's rig in the middle of the night, and now he's offering her clothes and telling her to go in the back. I couldn't blame her. The headlines write themselves. "Look, Willow," I said, making my voice as gentle as I could, which for me sounds like a bear trying to whisper. "I'm just a guy driving a truck. You're soaked. I got dry clothes. You can change in the back. It's got a curtain. It's totally separate. I'll stay right here. I won't even look. Promise." I held up one hand, a Boy Scout's honor I probably didn't deserve. Cross my heart and hope to die 1,000 miles from a decent burger joint. She watched me for a long moment, her eyes searching my face, looking for the catch, for the lie behind the smile. I guess she saw something she could trust. Or maybe she was just too cold to care anymore. The logic of survival overriding the logic of fear. The shivering was getting worse, racking her whole body in violent spasms. She gave a small, resigned nod. "Okay." I pointed a thumb over my shoulder. "It's just through there. It ain't the Ritz, but it's private enough." She unbuckled her seatbelt and started to maneuver herself into the small space between the seats. The cab of a 379. Pete is not designed for graceful movement, especially not for someone trying to be discreet. It was impossible for her not to brush against me. Her wet, cold hip pressed against my shoulder for a long moment, the chill soaking through my flannel shirt, but sending a bolt of pure heat straight through me. Her cold, bare arm brushed the back of my neck, sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. The scent of her damp hair, of rain and that floral perfume, filled my nostrils. Every point of contact was like a brand, sizzling on my skin. I gripped the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. My eyes locked on the hypnotizing rhythm of the windshield wipers. Slap, slap, slap. I heard her slide through the opening into the sleeper. The curtain, a thick piece of vinyl meant to block out the light, swished shut with a final-sounding thud. And then the sounds started. Sounds that were 1,000 times more potent than any picture. Sounds that were pure, uncut fuel for a trucker's lonely imagination. This was going to be the longest damn ride of my life. The silence that followed was louder than the storm. All I could hear was the deep-throated hum of the engine, the steady slap of the wipers, and the sound of my own heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The cab was filled with the smell of her, that intoxicating mix of rain and expensive perfume, and now it was mixed with the damp, earthy scent of her wet clothes in the confined space of the sleeper. It was making me dizzy, clouding my thoughts, making it hard to focus on the slippery black ribbon of road ahead. Then, from behind the curtain came a series of small, intimate noises that drove my imagination into overdrive. Every sound painted a picture in my head, more vivid than any movie, more tantalizing than any fantasy. First, the faint, high-pitched sound of a zipper. Zzz-zip. Slow and deliberate. I pictured that black dress unpeeling from her skin, the teeth of the zipper parting over the delicate bumps of her spine. I imagined the cool air of the cab hitting her wet back, the goosebumps rising on her skin. I pictured the dress falling away, pooling at her feet in a wet black puddle. My throat felt like it was full of sand. I needed a drink, but the only thing to drink was the lukewarm coffee in my thermos, and I didn't dare take a hand off the wheel. Then, a soft rustling of fabric, the sound of wet cloth being pulled away from damp skin. A little sigh, maybe of relief at being free of the cold, clinging dress, maybe of frustration. It was a soft, breathy sound that went straight to my groin. I stared so hard at the road ahead, I thought I was going to burn a hole right through the windshield. The yellow line was my lifeline, the only thing keeping me anchored to reality, the only thing keeping my eyes from flicking to the rearview mirror. The mirror was a liar anyway. All it showed was the dark, unmoving curtain. No help there. There was more rustling, the sound of my old worn-out clothes. I knew exactly what she was finding back there. A gray T-shirt from some truck stop in Ohio, so old and washed so many times it was soft as a cloud, and a pair of black sweatpants with a busted drawstring I kept meaning to fix. On me, they were just comfortable junk, something to wear when I was off the clock. On her, well, my mind was painting some very vivid, very interesting pictures. I could almost feel the soft cotton of that old shirt sliding over her smooth skin. I heard a soft thump as something heavy and wet hit the mattress. The dress, probably. Then a moment of quiet. What was she doing now? The quiet was worse than the noise. Was she taking off the bra, the panties? The not knowing was killing me. I could feel the heat building in the cab, a combination of the heater working overtime and my own blood pressure going through the roof. The windows were starting to fog up at the edges, the moisture from her wet clothes and our breathing sealing us in, creating a hazy, private world. Sam. Her voice came from right behind my head, a soft, hesitant sound that made me jump a foot. She had parted the curtain just a crack, and her voice slipped through like a ghost. Yeah? I managed to croak out, my eyes still glued to the road, my knuckles white on the wheel. These pants, the string is broken. They're not exactly staying up. There was a hint of amusement in her voice, a little thread of laughter that told me the fear was starting to melt away. I swallowed hard, my Adam's apple feeling like a golf ball. Yeah, sorry about that. You can just tie a knot in it, or something. Real smooth, Sam, real smooth. A regular Casanova of the interstate. Right, a knot, she said, and I could hear the smile in her voice now, clear as day. It was a warm, musical sound. The curtain swished shut again. A few more agonizing minutes passed. I was shifting gears to climb a steep grade, my hand on the big chrome stick, the engine groaning with the effort, when the curtain opened for good. Okay, she said softly. I'm decent. The word decent was a massive understatement. I risked a glance over my shoulder, and my brain just stopped. All functions ceased. The part of me that was worried about the road, the rain, the schedule, it all just switched off. She was standing in the small opening to the sleeper, bathed in the dim, green glow of the dashboard lights. She was wearing my old gray T-shirt. On her, it wasn't a shirt. It was a dress. A short, ridiculously sexy dress. It hung down to the middle of her thighs, the worn cotton clinging in all the right places, hinting at the curves underneath without giving everything away. The sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, showing off her slender arms. The neckline, stretched out from years of wear, hung off one of her shoulders, revealing a perfect pale curve of skin, and the thin black strap of her bra. That same bra I'd seen through her wet dress. The sweatpants were bunched loosely around her hips, held up by the knot she'd tied, the excess fabric only emphasizing how tiny her waist was and how long her legs were. She looked incredible, 1,000 times sexier than she had in that fancy black dress. It was the contrast, the city girl in the trucker's clothes, the elegance and the grit all rolled into one impossible, breathtaking package. Her hair was still damp, but she'd pushed it back from her face, and it was starting to dry in soft waves around her shoulders. The smudged mascara was still there, but now it looked less tragic and more rock and roll, like she'd just come from the best concert of her life, not the worst drive. She slipped back into the passenger seat, the leather squeaking under her. She pulled her legs up, tucking her bare feet underneath her on the seat. The huge sweatpants made her look small and vulnerable, but the look in her eye was anything but. The fear was gone, completely, replaced by a spark of something else. Mischief, confidence, a challenge. Much better, she said, sighing as the warm air from the heater blasted her. Thank you, Sam. You're a lifesaver. Any time, I mumbled, turning my attention back to the road, though my brain was still short-circuiting. I was aware of her in a way I hadn't been before. The space between us seemed to crackle with electricity. Every time I shifted gears, my elbow brushed her knee. Each time, it was like a static shock, a tiny explosion of heat that shot up my arm, and each time, she didn't pull her leg away. The cab was getting smaller and smaller, the air thicker and hotter. "So what's a girl like you doing in a dress like that on a mountain like this?" I asked, trying to make conversation, trying to break the spell that was settling over us. She laughed, a real, genuine laugh this time. It was a beautiful sound, like music, filling the quiet cab and chasing away the last of the gloom. "I'm a cellist," she said, "or I was tonight. I had a gig at some fancy resort up in the mountains, the kind of place where people pay more for a bottle of wine than I make in a week, a wedding. A cellist, huh? That's classy. I play the radio pretty good myself." "It was classy," she said, her voice tightening a little, a hint of steel under the silk. "Until the groom, a finance bro named Chad, of course, got drunk and decided my cello case would make a great bongo drum. Started slapping it while his buddies cheered him on. I told him where he could stick his drumsticks, they packed up my things, and walked out. I was so mad, I just got in the car and drove. Didn't even pay attention to where I was going, and then this." She waved a hand at the storm outside, which was still putting on a pretty good show. "Sounds like Chad's the one who should be standing on the side of the road," I grunted, gripping the gear shift a little tighter. "Some people got no respect." She smiled, a real warm smile that lit up her whole face and made the green dashboard lights seem brighter. "You know, I think you're right." We fell into a comfortable silence after that. The storm was starting to let up a little, the rain slacking off to a steady drizzle. The fog was thick, though, hugging the road in a dense white blanket. It was like driving through a cloud. I was leaning forward, squinting to see the yellow line, my whole body tense with concentration. "You're a good driver," she said softly, her voice just for me, not for the storm or the truck. "Had a lot of practice," I said, downshifting for another curve. My elbow brushed her knee again. This time the contact lingered for a second too long, a warm pressure point in the cool cab. I could feel the warmth of her skin soak right through my flannel shirt, a little patch of fire on my arm. "You know," she said, her voice lower now, almost a purr that sent a vibration straight through me. "This is kind of nice." "Being stranded in a storm?" I asked, raising an eyebrow but not looking at her. I didn't dare. If I looked at her now, I was liable to drive us straight into a ditch. "No," she said. She shifted in her seat, turning to face me more. The leather creaked, a sound full of implication. This, the truck, the sound of the engine. It's like being in a cave, safe and warm while the world is falling apart outside. She reached out and put her hand on the dashboard, her fingers tracing the patterns in the worn plastic. Her nails were painted a dark, glossy red, a flash of color in the gloom. "It feels powerful, all this weight, all this momentum, and you're in complete control of it." I risked a glance at her. It was a mistake. Her face was only a couple of feet from mine. Her dark eyes were searching my face in the dim light, and they weren't looking at my eyes. They were looking at my mouth. Her own lips were slightly parted, still a little swollen from the cold. The fog on the windows was so thick now, it was like we were in our own private world. We were completely sealed off. Just the two of us, the rumble of the engine, and the thick, heavy air between us. "Yeah, well," I said, my voice coming out as a rough rasp that didn't sound like me at all. "Sometimes control is overrated." She smiled a slow, lazy smile. a smile that said she knew exactly what I was thinking, and she was thinking it, too. A smile that was pure, unadulterated invitation. "Is it?" she whispered. She leaned in, just a fraction of an inch, closing the already small distance between us. The scent of her perfume, now warmed by her skin and the heater, filled my head, chasing out all thoughts of roads and rain and schedules. My heart was doing a drum solo against my ribs. The road, the storm, the whole damn world outside the cab of my truck just melted away into a meaningless blur. There was only her. "Maybe," she murmured, her breath ghosting across my cheek, warm and sweet. "Maybe sometimes you just have to let the storm take you." My hand was still on the gear shift, frozen in place. Her gaze dropped to it, then slowly, deliberately, back up to my eyes. The invitation was hanging in the air between us, thick and heavy as the fog outside. It wasn't a question anymore. It was a statement, a declaration. I saw a pull-off up ahead, one of those little gravel patches for runaway trucks, carved out of the mountainside. It was empty, a perfect, dark, secluded slice of nowhere, shrouded in mist and pine trees. I didn't say a word. I just flicked on my turn signal. The rhythmic click-clack was the only sound for a moment, a metronome counting down to the inevitable. It was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. Each click a hammer blow against the silence. Willow's smile widened. She knew. Of course she knew. She'd been the one steering us here all along. I eased the big rig off the road, the tires crunching loudly on the wet gravel, a sound of finality. I pulled us deep into the pull-off, tucking the nose of the truck behind a curtain of thick pine trees, their branches heavy with rain, shielding us from the road. I killed the headlights, plunging us into a deeper darkness, and then I killed the engine. The sudden absolute silence was deafening. The world stopped. The only thing moving was the blood roaring in my ears and the frantic, wild beat of my own heart. The only light was the faint green glow of the dash, painting her face in shadows and secrets, making her eyes look like black pools of ink. I turned to her. She was already unbuckling her seatbelt, the sharp click of the buckle echoing in the stillness like a gunshot. "That sleeper cab," she said, her voice a low, husky tremor that shot straight to my gut and coiled there, hot and heavy. "You said it was private." "Yeah," I breathed. The word felt like it was scraped from the bottom of my lungs. It was all I could manage. "Good," she said. Getting from the front to the back was a clumsy, desperate tangle of limbs. It wasn't a graceful climb this time. It was a collision. She launched herself over the center console, not waiting for an invitation, a blur of pale skin and dark clothing, and I met her halfway. My hands found her waist, sliding under the ridiculously large T-shirt. Her skin was warm and electric against my rough palms, a shocking contrast to how cold she'd been before. She grabbed the front of my flannel shirt, her knuckles pressing hard into my chest, and pulled me toward her with a strength that surprised me. Our mouths crashed together. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a release, a dam breaking after 100 years of pressure. It was all teeth and tongue, and the raw, desperate hunger of two people who had been circling each other in a tiny, superheated space for what felt like an eternity. It tasted of rain and my stale coffee, and her, a flavor I knew I'd never forget, a flavor of storm and desire. Her hands were in my hair, tangling in it, pulling me closer, and mine were roaming her back, feeling the strong, smooth muscles under the soft cotton of my shirt. We stumbled backward, a chaotic two-person stampede, through the curtain and collapsed onto the mattress in the sleeper. The small space, which usually felt like my own personal coffin, was now the entire universe. The old springs of the mattress groaned a loud vocal protest as we landed in a heap, me half on top of her, her legs tangled with mine. The storm outside had started to pick up again, as if on cue, jealous of the one we were starting inside. A low rumble of thunder shook the ground under us, and the rain began to hammer against the roof of the cab, a frantic drumbeat to our own chaotic rhythm. "You know," she gasped, pulling back for a breath, her lips swollen and red, her eyes dark and wild in the gloom. "For a guy who drives for a living, you seem awfully eager to park." "Depends on the cargo," I growled, before diving back in to kiss her again, to swallow her words and taste her laughter. What happened next wasn't a gentle drive down a country lane. It was a full-blown hurricane contained in a 10-by-8-foot box. She was a whirlwind of motion and heat. She wriggled out from under me with a dancer's grace, and in one fluid movement was on top, straddling my hips. My old T-shirt was bunched up around her waist, and those ridiculously oversized sweatpants were gone, kicked off into a dark corner sometime during our clumsy ballet. All she had on was that shirt and that little black lace bra I'd seen a ghost of earlier, a fragile piece of civilization in the middle of our glorious savagery. "My turn to drive," she whispered, lining down until her lips were brushing my ear, her hot breath sending a fresh wave of shivers through me. And brother, she drove. She took control, her body moving with a rhythm that was both powerful and graceful. The cellist. She knew all about rhythm, about tempo, about building to a crashing crescendo. The whole truck started to rock. At first it was a slow, deep, grinding sway, like a ship settling into a heavy sea. The suspension creaked and groaned, singing a song I'd never heard it sing before, a bluesy tune of protest and strain. The empty coffee cup on my dash rattled and fell to the floor with a clatter we barely heard. The heat was insane. The small enclosed space became a sauna. Sweat was pouring off both of us, our skin slick, making every movement a slippery, friction-filled slide. The single small window in the sleeper was completely whited out with steam in seconds. We were in our own private bubble, hidden from the world, a world we'd forgotten even existed. The air was thick, filled with the smell of our bodies, her perfume, and something else, something primal and raw and absolutely perfect. A flash of lightning lit up the cab for a split second, a brilliant, strobing flash that froze her in a perfect, ghostly white silhouette. Her head was thrown back, her dark hair fanned out across the pillow behind me. Her eyes were closed, her lips parted in a silent gasp of pure pleasure. In that instant, she was the most beautiful, terrifying thing I had ever seen. A storm goddess in a trucker's T-shirt, riding out a tempest of her own making. Then the thunder cracked, a deafening explosion right over us, and the truck shook with it as if it had been struck. She cried out, a sharp musical sound that was swallowed by the roar of the storm. She moved faster, her hips driving a frantic, powerful beat. The rocking of the truck became more violent, more desperate. It wasn't a gentle sway anymore. It was a bucking, shuddering earthquake. The shocks were crying for mercy. I grabbed her hips, my big hands barely spanning their width, trying to anchor myself, trying to match her relentless pace. The frame of the truck was moaning. The whole rig felt like it was going to tear itself apart from the inside out. It was chaos. It was madness. It was glorious. The storm inside the cab raged, matching the one outside, blow for blow. It built and built, a crescendo of heat and motion and sound, the groaning of the truck and the hammering of the rain and our own ragged gasps, all blending into one wild symphony. It felt like the whole world was going to explode. And then it did. With a final, desperate cry that blended with a clap of thunder, she collapsed onto my chest, her body going limp and heavy. She was shaking, her breath coming in ragged, shuddering sobs. The truck gave one last, violent lurch, and then settled with a long, metallic sigh, the springs quietening in relief. The only sound was the drumming of the rain on the roof, softer now, the ticking of the cooling engine, and the sound of our two hearts beating a frantic, exhausted retreat. We lay there, tangled in the darkness and the heat, wrapped in the quiet, steamy aftermath of our own private storm. We lay there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. Time had ceased to exist in our foggy, sweat-soaked bubble. The storm outside had finally worn itself out, the rain softening from a frantic hammering to a gentle, rhythmic patter on the roof. The world was quiet again, breathing a sigh of relief. My old T-shirt was soaked, plastered to her back. Her head was tucked under my chin, her damp hair tickling my neck. I could feel the slow, steady beat of her heart against my ribs, gradually returning to normal. My hand was resting on the small of her back, feeling the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. She stirred, lifting her head with a sleepy sigh. In the faint pre-dawn light that was just starting to filter through the fogged-up windows, a watery gray light, I could see her face. The mascara was completely gone now, washed away by rain and sweat. Her face was flushed, her lips were swollen, and she had the most beautifully exhausted smile I'd ever seen. She looked content, like a cat is sleeping in a sunbeam after a long night of chasing mice. "Well, Sam the trucker," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep and satisfaction. Her fingers traced a lazy pattern on my chest. "You've got one hell of a suspension system on this thing." I let out a laugh, a deep rumble in my chest that made her vibrate. "It's never had a workout like that before. I think you owe me a new set of shocks." "Fair enough." She chuckled, her voice a soft purr. She pushed herself up, the worn cotton of the shirt sliding against my skin. The cab felt cold and empty as she moved away from me. She started gathering her things in the dim light, moving with a quiet, deliberate grace that seemed out of place in the messy cab. She found her muddy black dress in a heap on the floor and looked at it with a grimace of pure disgust. "I'm never wearing that again," she said, tossing it aside like it was contaminated. She started pulling on the sweatpants, which looked even more ridiculously large on her now. "There's a little town, Harmony Creek, about 10 miles down this road, right?" "Yeah, that's right. Not much there but a diner and a bus station." "Perfect," she said, tying a clumsy knot in the busted drawstring of the sweats. "You can drop me there. I can get a coffee, use a real bathroom, and figure out how to get back to civilization." "I can take you further," I offered, sitting up. The offer was genuine. A part of me didn't want this to end. "I'm headed east, all the way to the coast." She shook her head, pulling my T-shirt down over her hips. She turned and looked at me, still lying on the mattress, propped up on my elbows. Her expression was soft, but firm. No, this was perfect just the way it was. A little bubble in time, a storm. Let's not try to stretch it out and make it something it isn't. It'll just ruin it. She was right. Some things are meant to be exactly what they are, and nothing more. A flash in the pan, a bolt of lightning. You don't try to bottle it. You just enjoy the light and the thunder, and let it go. I pulled on my jeans and fired up the engine. The familiar rumble filled the cab, but it felt different. It felt like an accomplice. We drove the last 10 miles in a comfortable, easy silence, watching the sun come up over the misty green mountains. The fog was burning off, revealing a world washed clean by the storm, everything sparkling and new. I pulled up in front of a little place called the Harmony Diner. Its neon sign was still on, buzzing in the gray morning light. It looked warm and inviting, a beacon of normalcy after a night of chaos. She turned to me in the passenger seat. "Well," she said, "this is me." "Willow," I said, her name feeling important, like I should say it one last time. It was... I trailed off, not knowing how to finish. A wild ride, the best storm I'd ever been in. Nothing seemed right. A storm. She finished for me, a small, knowing smile on her face. She leaned over the center console and gave me a kiss. It wasn't like the frantic, desperate kisses in the back. This one was slow and soft and sweet. It was a thank you and a goodbye all in one, a perfect period at the end of a wild sentence. "Take care of yourself, Sam," she whispered against my lips, and then she was gone. She hopped down from the cab, more graceful this time, and I watched her walk into the diner, a small figure in my huge, baggy clothes, her bare feet slapping on the wet pavement. The door swung shut behind her, and she disappeared. I sat there for a minute, the engine rumbling, the passenger seat looking huge and empty. I sighed, ran a hand over my face, and put the truck in gear. I had a schedule to keep, miles to burn. It wasn't until I was 100 miles down the road, when the sun was high in the sky, and the memory of the night was starting to feel like a dream, that I decided to tidy up the sleeper. As I pulled the tangled sheets off the mattress, something small and black and lacy fell out onto the floor. Her panties, the ones I'd caught a glimpse of when she climbed into the cab. I picked them up. They were delicate, made of silk and lace, weighing nothing at all in my big, rough hand. They smelled faintly of her, of that expensive perfume mixed with the scent of the storm. I just stood there in the back of my cab, in a sun-drenched parking lot in the middle of nowhere, holding this tiny piece of evidence from the storm. Proof that it wasn't a dream. A slow grin spread across my face. I folded them carefully and tucked them into the glove compartment, right next to my logbook and a half-eaten bag of jerky. A souvenir. I climbed back into the driver's seat, feeling about 10 pounds lighter, and a hell of a lot more awake than any amount of coffee could ever make me. I was still starving, but the cheeseburger could wait. After a night like that, a man needs a steak, a big one, and maybe a new set of shocks for old Bessie. She'd definitely earned 'em. Hell, we both had.